root and tops, iris roots. Of course, then there's cattle and hogs and fruit. But in this picture, we didn't have the cattle in here yet. Plenty of grass, bees, honey. Now look at the difference here, where now that the cattle are introduced into the system, they've pruned the branches right up. These are snub-nosed, hornless cattle. Actually, these are pigs, obviously. They're cleaning up the windfall apples after we've already picked the low-hanging fruit that's looking good. What's the difference between this one and the last one? This one has a lot of low branches to the ground, and this is a very, very humid. You see it's shady here, a lot more humid. A lot more fungal disease is going to get established in here, and then a spore, all it has to do is splash up and catch this leaf and splash up and splash up and splash up. So ladder fuels that would allow fire to climb a tree are similar in that they would also allow fungus to climb a tree during wet circumstances. So all of our trees now have 5 feet of zero branches down low. Very few fungal diseases in these trees, and we get plenty of yield. Thank you very much. This type of hazelnut orchard is a different disturbance regime than someone like this. This is in Minnesota. This is hybrid hazels, bush hazels being grown in a field. No herbicide being used, lots of herbicide being used here. These are European hazels that want to grow into a multi-stem shrub, but are pruned or trained, or a hormone is applied to prevent it, a sprout inhibiting hormone sprayed on that to prevent it from turning into a shrub. So there's extra pruning involved. There is grass and there's hazelnuts. It's a good 2 different things for diversity. This, on the other hand, had no herbicide, no pest control, no disease control, and these are American hybrid hazels, which are more of a shrub form. Let them be a shrub. So we have to harvest them differently. This is different than this, which is different than this. Chihuahua, excuse me, hello? So this is all hand harvested. This just took place this last weekend at my farm. This is a crew harvesting seed from some of my top producing hazelnut bushes. And everybody can participate. This is just a different system. It's different effect. And what we need to know by seeing all these different systems, which one do we want to have? Which type of system do we want to have? When we do something in our system, when we hand harvest hazelnuts this way, or if we machine harvest this way, or if we keep our orchard with an herbicide band underneath. It's herbicide application, there's root sprout inhibitors, there's pruning, there's 3 different inputs, there's mowing the grass, 4 different inputs. No doubt there's spray for pest control, disease control, 7 different inputs involved in the system to get a similar thing here, the crop of hazelnuts. A lot fewer inputs here, we're still mechanically harvested. Even fewer inputs here. What system fits your lifestyle, your family needs, your personal moral values? What system can you do, actually? Can you afford to do? Can you afford to do this, where you just plant these plants, you graze the grass? Look at all the trampling footprints from the cattle. You graze the grass with animals in order to get the grass to be short. The fertilizer comes from the animals, obviously, of course. So instead of having grass mowing taken care of by a piece of equipment that I own that falls apart, that I have to buy fuel for and fix, that doesn't work half the time, that's an input, that's an expensive input. I can use cattle, which are grazing that grass off short, and they're adding a fertilizer that I don't have to add with another machine that breaks down and buy this fertilizer from somewhere else. The animals are taking care of that job for me. And then when we're going in and harvesting, actually, there's a lot of my hazelnuts right now. We're letting the cattle harvest them right off the shrub. It's really pretty cool. Here they are, right there. There's the moose. So really, we need to harvest it for human being consumption. We don't have to eat the hazelnuts. We can eat the animals instead. So I guess I'm a lazy vegan. Instead of eating the hazelnuts myself as my protein source, I let the cows eat the hazelnuts, and then I just kill one cow and eat them all winter long, or something like that. This method of raising beef has one particular disturbance regime. It has a real, measurable, quantifiable ecological effect. The ground, it's in a near desert almost, so there's hardly any rain, hardly any vegetation. It's all trampled to death or eaten like years ago. The animals stand around, they poop wherever they go. Since it's so dry, the poop mostly just dries up, and it's layer after layer after layer of hard compacted animal manure. Well, then when it rains, all that animal manure goes flowing down into the local closest streams. These animals are in close confinement. They're fed concentrated feeds from outside. They need a lot of antibiotics because when it does rain, there's all kinds of parasites and pests and diseases that take off in here. So this is a very input-based system in order to get beef. This is another way to get beef, has a different disturbance regime. This is Greg Judy's farms, where he has field openings in a matrix of forest. He has some that are savanna also. It's fairly densely stocked, mob-stocked rotational grazing system. This is a 40-acre field at 300. There's 300 animals out here on a 40-acre field. They were just let in like 5 minutes before this picture were taken, and they'll be moved again in the morning. That's a radically different system where you have the trees on the outside and the animals eating the grass. It's different than this system. Now think about the differences that's happening right here. We've got cattle, yes. We have cattle with very little expense. We don't have to add the antibiotics. We don't have to deliver their feed. We don't have to have thousands of acres worth of corn and beans being grown and combines being manufactured and trucks transporting it to the farm, putting it in storage silos and conveyor belts moving it to the animals. We don't have to hire a person full-time just to go out with a skid steer loader and haul away dead animals. We can have a system like this, and we have our animals. But what else are we harvesting out of this system? We harvest nothing else other than his animals. Well, here, we've got our animals. We're harvesting the animals, and we're harvesting nuts off the walnut trees. Eventually, we'll be harvesting timber. Right now, we're harvesting firewood. There already were, if you notice it's lighter over on that side over there, I already harvested hybrid poplar out of there. The bottom of the hybrid poplar became building. That is now our cider mill building. The middle ones became, we inoculated those with oyster mushrooms for consumption and sale. And then the smaller ones we either chipped in place or we used for firewood. And then you notice there's mulberries in here as well. Well, these mulberries, yeah, we pick some, we make some jams, jellies, and alcoholic beverages. But the main reason for having the mulberries around are for the pigs. So out of the same system, ecological system, we've got cattle, pigs, mushrooms, walnuts, trees, grass, zero inputs. One of the things that I've lived for umpteen years, I can show you guys how to run and manage a farm or a ranch with zero inputs, as close to zero inputs as we possibly can get. We can't leave, we have to harvest, we got to be part of it. Sometimes we'll do some minimal fertility amendments with ground, rocks, and stuff like that. But this is as close as you can get to inputs. Zero is a very affordable number. I can't afford the investment that it takes to buy this much land, to buy that much infrastructure, the fences, the watering, the labor, the chemicals, the feed, the storage for the feed. That's an expensive proposition. It is very fragile. One little well-placed fuel crisis or worker strike, and this whole system right here shuts down. Whereas this one, a lot more sustainable. This one happens to be dependent on a lot of rented ground that Greg Judy has a lot of landowners, absentee landowners around him that just want somebody to manage the land and that they don't have to pay. So Greg Judy manages the land for them, and he doesn't pay rent. They don't have to pay to have the land managed. It's a good win-win situation for both of them. But if all of a sudden, if the economy turns around and real estate starts getting more expensive and people want to start renting the land, his no-rent formula is going to disappear, so that's a little fragility of this system. Whereas this system right here, the biggest fragility that I can see in our system is the fact that we aren't pushing yield. We aren't pushing raising as many beef as we possibly can, raising as many pigs as we can, as many trees as we can. We're not maximizing anything. This is a real easygoing, laid-back, get-by kind of system. If we wanted to push it, it would require more work and more attention, but I'm lazy. I don't want to do that. So now, let's go to growing pine, for example. This is a zero input method of growing pine. This is in a designated wilderness up in Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness in Minnesota. Because it's designated wilderness, human beings do nothing to this other than visit. This was the location of a fire, I believe, 3 years prior to when I visited this site. Look at the structure, the physiognomy of this place. Fairly large trees, straight and tall, not a lot of lattifules. The trees have rough bark. This is a fire-managed ecosystem. So it's a zero method input of growing pine, but what are the yields for human beings? Because it's in a wilderness area, we won't even eventually harvest the timber out of this. This will all just be part of the natural process, but it's a great place to go and study how does this system work. How can I plug into this system and actually obtain yields from it? So zero input method of growing high quality, super straight and tall, knot free, high volume of pine. Well, what about this? Don't they look kind of similar? Look at that, and look at this. This is also in a fire managed area. Look, there is a human being here. But this is a system that I've been working on for a number of years with the landowner, and he's been on a 10-year conversion process of converting from prior use to a silvopasture system with one of the long-term goals of growing timber. And this is all pine, southern pine timber. But he's doing most of the ground cover management, not with fire, but with animals. He's got this look, but with animals. If the animals were to come in here, say cattle, for example, they'd chew all this down. There'd be more opportunity for grasses to grow. You could actually overgraze all of the brush in here and have grasses re-sprout if there were grasses in the forest floor, or you could top seed with grass seeds to get your grasses established that you want. He never planted any seed here. And actually, this site, there's quite a few videos. Those of you who are members of our Economics Action Team do know, of course, that pretty soon we're going to be starting to charge for this service. One of the things is when you are a member, you have access to additional trainings that will be further on our members page. There's several different videos of this site where I narrate and talk about all the different strategies of what particularly did we do at what time in order to get this to look like that. Here's another way of raising pine. This was an area that was previously clear-cut, or it was a field that somebody planted rows of pine. They probably did herbicide for a few years, or they mowed for a few years, and it closed the canopy, nice and straight and tall. But there's it's a monocrop. There's hardly anything alive in here except for a few, adventitious trees that somehow managed to get established in there. Very, very much sterile, devoid of life. Here's the other systems, other ways of doing pine. Larger land holdings, oftentimes if they're clear-cut or replanted or not even replanted, you use a selective herbicide to kill the plants that you don't want and let your plants grow. But how much does a helicopter cost, people? Most landowners are not able to afford a helicopter. What this guy's doing right here, I'm not exactly sure. I do know that in some places there's a lot of folks that you wait for a good seed yield on your woody species, and then you go ahead and scarify the soil, because if we want to disturb the site, remember, some of the things that disturbance does is make new soil exposed for new planting mediums and so on, and it reduces competing vegetation. We can reduce competing vegetation with a mower, we can do it with a disc harrow, we can do it with helicopters, with spray rigs, or we can do it with animals. Because in this picture right here, I'm standing right here. This is there's the landowner, and this is my engineer contractor guy, Eric Berg. He's on the red team. Turn around in this picture and I look right here. This is how he manages this system. He uses the cows and a portable electric fence to keep down. He uses himself with a chainsaw and his tractor to remove trees that are crooked or widespread to allow a little bit more sun into the forest floor. He's replanting. He's thinking ahead because he knows how it works. He knows that eventually these pines, if he doesn't harvest them, they're going to get old, they're going to snap, they're going to start rotting. So if he wants to have some value out of them, he can actually remove them sooner instead of later, let the smaller ones grow. So what he could do is come into this space here and plant a shade-tolerant species that likes a moister site, such as pecan. He's growing lots of pecans. Putting in these sites here to start growing. And then a few years later, he can begin dropping trees one by one. He has his own portable sawmill, and he sells lumber as a part-time business. This is a great way to interact with this resource base in a manner that actually helps it to grow. We can increase soil organic matter. We can increase species diversity. This is not a monocrop way of raising pine trees or cattle, for that matter. Some of the young stock, and I think it's a lot more beautiful than a lot of different ways to other ways to grow pine or cattle. I'm going to do a hurry up finish here. So fire, of course, has been the dominant disturbance factor in landscape history worldwide. How do we understand how fire impacts the system? How do we imitate it? We can imitate it with helicopters and spray. Part of what it does is it does not continuous. It's discontinuous. More vegetation is removed over on one spot than another part. It's heterogeneous. It's a mixed hodgepodge of burn what's left behind. That sets in motion the regeneration of the next forest. And if we know ahead of time that we're going to disturb a site either with fire or mowing or with cattle, and we go plant the species that we want, we know what the successional pathway is going to be. That previous landowner with the cattle under the pines, he knows that he's going to have a pecan grove by the time he retires. Disturbance affects different plants differently. They reproduce differently. They have different survival techniques for fire, from root sprouting to basal sprouting. Ground layering, thick bark. Ground layering is like if a willow tree falls over in a flood and touches the ground. The place where it touched the ground will start sprouting up again. And then other things like this, fire-resistant species, fire-adapted species have really thick bark. Look at her fingers there. Her fingers are buried up to the knuckle in these deep, deep cracks of this thick, corky bark. And they have light seeds that can blow all the way in. If you remember from a week or so ago talking about Burnt Island, how did that seed get there when this was burned as a rock when my dad was a little kid? The seed blew in the wind. These were all fire adaptations. We understand that when we do a disturbance, we're going to create this in a lot of trees. When I go through and I cut black locust, I know it's going to behave this way. I know if I mow this off, it's going to continue to do that. It's like the hydra. I know if I cut certain species, oak, mostly on my side, or chestnut, they'll respond by putting out multiple stump suckers. And I know that nearby things with light seeds, like willows and aspen and cottonwood, will be floating in the wind and landing on my site, and landing on anything that's disturbed and sprouting and taking over that particular area. If we understand our successional pathway, we understand how disturbance works, we can steer our systems through time using disturbance. We can reduce competition. Think of all the different ways we can reduce competition. We can do it with fire. We can do it with machines. We can do it with chemicals. We can do it with animals. How do we want to disturb our site? What do we want to establish there once we have disturbed the site? Why are we doing anything in a particular place? You want to leave it alone and just observe that site? That's valuable in and of itself. But to understand how these disturbances work and how the system responds is really crucial for our understanding. We prepare seed beds. This is just overland flow after a fire. We're exposing that soil so new seeds can get established. We get rid of organic matter to a certain extent, because if we're going to get trees established, we want to either use some herbicide or some plow, scratch a line with a subsoiler, use a shovel, use some mulch to kill any living plants there, just to change that ecosystem, that micro-ecosystem, to favor our new plants. So what's this site here? We've talked a little bit about the pines, and this is obviously a pine stand. It actually was burned, I think it was like 5-7 years prior. We know that how pine systems operate, because we've done a lot of studying. We look around, we observe other systems, that fire is a major issue here. If you look at the bark of these trees, it's burnt down at the bottom. So this place gets periodically episodically burned. How can we steer the succession on this site? So one, we know that it's fire prone, so it's going to behave like fire prone site does. So let's interact with it in such a way that it imitates what these species can tolerate. And let's create either new conditions for new species or more optimized conditions for the species that are here, and maybe prevent a little bit of the fire that prevent the negative impacts of fire, because if we only have 20, 30 stems left per acre that got left after a fire, we might want more stems per acre. And maybe we want some grass under here for grazing animals. Maybe we want openings for growing annual crops. So maybe we use a hydroaxe. This is an amazing tool. This site that we're about to see was a post clear cut. We went in with the hydroaxe and with a bulldozer. Let's imitate a pit and mound architecture. Any stumps that were in the way are now incorporated into this mound. So we have our swale and our berm. It's all designed to spread the water out from the valleys to the ridges, soak it in. We expose some soil to the light. We have more light available because we're going in with this monster, chewing it all up. We can get some grass seed established here. Now we've changed the forward succession of our system. It's like one chiropractic adjustment, and it's off and running in a totally new direction. The water is now managed. It's spreading to the ridges, like I said before, and observe the quasi-pit and mound. All these different roots are embedded in that guck. Then we use the hydroaxe, go through here and not destroy all of our regeneration. Remove some of the plants that are not necessarily desired on the site. This is a southern, southeastern U.S. pine situation. So once we get the water managed, we get that grinder. Notice how there's still a fair amount of stems that we left behind, and there's some of the young regeneration, but it's wide enough apart so that we'll get grass established underneath it. So we grow grass, and then one of the hottest new herbal medicines on the market is saw palmetto. Saw palmetto is used for prostate issues in gentlemen, and with so many aging baby boomers and Generation X's, it's a massive growth product. So what we've got here, this is practically a wild southern pine savanna. You got all kinds of grasses in there. There's Venus flytraps. There's the saw palmetto, obviously. There's all kinds of wildflowers, and you've got pine. In the north, I would want to be growing pine nuts for my pines, so I could be having Korean pines. I wouldn't be able to grow saw palmetto up in the north. And actually, I think what I'm going to do, because we're already after time, is I'm going to cut it right there. So I hope what you get an idea of here is in a restoration agriculture system is what we're going to try to do is imitate the natural ecosystem in the plants that we choose, and then in the techniques, how we disturb that site, and then we establish our new successional crops, and we manage it as naturally as possible so it can be as affordable as possible. So, Stephanie, has anybody asked any questions? I'll take a few questions for 5 or 10 minutes or so.
Awesome, yeah, we have a couple here. Starting out, here's one from Sam. As I'm learning to manage my animals to create the disturbances I want, most mistakes are recoverable with enough rest. Can you think of any management-created disturbance on a farm that would do long-term damage to a piece of land?
Well, yeah, first of all, I think what it would be is by holding the intellectual concept called a mistake. What there is there's feedback. There is feedback, and what we do is we observe what happened. We see how the system is reacting and responding, and then we make a decision. Do we do that again, or do we do something different? So let's get rid of that idea of mistake. There's no mistakes, it's just feedback. Is there anything that you could do that would be totally drastic? Well, do you want to do anything that's going to really degrade your resource base? If we think holistic management, one of our goals is to not degrade this resource base. We want to always aggregate it. Once we hit this, there'll be a site capacity where we cannot get any more productive than it is. Then we want to be able to maintain it there somehow. And sometimes what it might take, this particular pine stand right here, once these pines get bigger, we might actually choose to clear cut. Well, longleaf pine and loblolly pine, they require bare exposed soil to sprout. So how are we going to expose that soil? Well, we might choose at that time to rip up all the saw palmetto instead of just harvesting it annually, and then run through there with the hydroaxe, set deep to scarify the mineral soil, clear cut the whole darn thing. All the seeds fall off of the trees. A lot of the cones, when they're burned by fire, and then burn it with fire. That sounds pretty extreme, doesn't it? What we did is we We ground up everything on the ground. We ripped all the saw palmetto out of the ground. We ground everything up with the hydro axe. We clear cut the trees. Then we hauled all that organic matter away. Then we burned it. That might be the best thing for the site for regeneration. That's one choice that we can do. So is there anything that would do that would like totally ruin the land forever without long enough rest? Well, if you pave it, you won't be able to get enough rest to farm it again in the future. Or you could blow a volcano up on it. What could get worse than blowing up a volcano? So part of what I wanted to point out here is there's no right or wrong. There are disturbances. We want to understand what is the disturbance, what is the effect. So how does this disturbance work? What is the effect on the landscape? How does this ecosystem respond and recover from that? How can we work with that pattern right there? That understanding that pattern is critical to being able to ecologically manage your property. And I'm sticking with that answer. Got a few more.
I love it. Here's another question we have. It says, I recall Mark mentioning before that all the diseases will show up on my site unless all the neighbors are doing the same thing I am. I have 5 acres, keyline designed, and there's conventional chem ag monoculture fields around me. Do I have a chance of having a healthy ecosystem?
You do have a chance of having a healthy ecosystem. We'll want to be careful about the word healthy for one, but for two is understand your site conditions. You've got 5 acres. Pest and disease cycles, plant life cycles, animal life cycles all have different, if you've got these little wavelengths, they all have different period of time, a different periodicity before they settle into some sort of a balance. With 5 acres surrounded by chem ag, you have different conditions than this guy does here. This is a 100-acre site surrounded by industrial forest land. So once every 35 years, a helicopter goes over after the clear cut and sprays everything with herbicide. So it's a very minimal input on that side. I'm surrounded by conventional corn and beans everywhere. 5 acres, if you create a diverse system on those 5 acres, all the pests and diseases that like those plants and animals will show up. You may not have enough critical mass of, hazelnuts or chestnuts or cattle or pigs or cucumbers, whatever it is, to have enough to satisfy the pests and diseases so that you have surplus, genuine ecological surplus to harvest for yourself. You may not be able to do that with 0 inputs on a smaller site. This is an ecological reality that the larger the landscape scale, if we're talking like bark beetle in the Colorado Rockies, it might be 5 states is finally big enough to control this outbreak of a pest or a disease. So all these different pests and diseases and animals and plants have different scales at which they all of a sudden will click and function really ecologically smoothly. The smaller the site, the more likely you are to have some sort of input necessary. Now, when you do that input, you go read somebody's book that says, oh yeah, you do every 5 days, you spray this, spray that, spray this, spray that. Or do you observe your system? You observe all of a sudden, I've got, emergence of codling moth. Well, how many are there? Can I trap them? Can I, use some kind of distraction spray? Can I use a trap crop? All these other different strategies come into play. As restoration agriculture people, we have all of those options at our disposal. Everything from nuclear weapons and chemical agriculture with GMOs, all the way over to 100% absolutely natural wild stone tools and sticks. That is our toolbox. I stay away from the nuclear weapons and chemical side of things as much as I can. I try to approach the natural side of things as much as possible, and the scale, the size of the planting does affect the amount of control inputs that you'll have to put into place.
Sounds good. I'll throw out one more question for you, and then we'll wrap
We'll sell you some. We got a whole bunch for sale right down the road from us. Come on down.
Last question from Scott, asking about pigs. Even though they are not herd animals, Can you elaborate on the disturbance that they give? And also, can you mob graze them?
Well, that's absolutely not true that they're not herding animals. You put them together and they all stick together. They are a herd. They're a herd animal. They don't necessarily have as large a herds as wildebeest or cattle, for example, or Cape buffalo, but they do herd. Their disturbance, you look, was it one webinar ago, 2 webinars ago, they have hoof impact. Their hoof impact is dramatically different than cattle. It's a sharper, pointier. They may actually, in some cases, have more hoof impact, per square inch because it's such a small hoof that they're on. They do a lot of the rooting and the plowing. We minimize that with rings in their noses, but you can go ahead and use that as part of your system. And even with rings in their noses, they still do a little bit of rooting and plowing. What I've noticed with pigs, though, is once they hit around 20, they start to break apart into a couple different clans. And there's only been like 3 or 4 times that we've had more than 20 pigs in the past 21 years. And every time we've had somewhere around 20, it's like you lose this little herd mentality in this one gang. And like over in Africa, observing warthogs, you rarely see more than 2 or 3 females with all their little kids and a couple of boys running around with them. So there's only about 15, 20, 30 of them in a herd. Can you mob graze them? Yes, you can. They have to be trained ahead of time a little bit more carefully than cattle do, in my experience. So you have a nice hot fence, you put them in a tight enclosed area. We do a double strand electric with metal mesh fence around it until they're accustomed to that. And then you put them out in a bigger enclosure and a bigger enclosure and a bigger enclosure. Through the years, there's been a couple times we really try to push it and really move the pigs around. I haven't noticed any additional gains or quality differences with really pushing their rotation. And they are, in my experience, a little bit lighter on the landscape than cattle are, because cattle, they'll really shred trees, where the pigs don't even bother the trees at all. So they're just different. And so observe pigs, the herding animals, pigs, how they disturb things. Of course, they're going to make a wallow because they can't sweat. They'll always make a wallow or a dust bath, depending on the circumstances. They'll oftentimes make a wallow by urinating in the same place over and over again. I tried limiting their water once because in a particular summer they kept spilling their water and they made a wallow where I didn't want it. So I would only give them enough water that they could drink right away. And then it'd be a little bit on the thirsty side. So then they all went and urinated in the same spot in order to make a wallow. And I figured that's pretty gross. Wallowing in your own pee, might as well provide you with some water. It's probably, I don't know what else is going on. It was just gross. So I think I rambled around that question, but part of what was disturbance, pigs, herding animals. I think I addressed that. Did I get everything? All the points in your question?
Yep, you hit all of them.
All right, and I've got to go. I've got to go to a meeting next. I will continue with this next week. This is about 2/3 of the way through the presentation. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And if you find any value in this, please be sure to go back. If you haven't seen all of these live, go back and listen to the recordings as they're posted. And hope to see you next time. Thank you, everybody.